This is Katrin with Disability Rights New York. Welcome to our podcast, Empire State of Rights, where we bring you information on the most relevant topics regarding disability rights and advocacy. Today, we welcome Janie Mejias, the U.S. organizer for Women Enabled International, WEI. She's here to discuss her advocacy work for the rights of women with disabilities and the intersectionality of feminism and disability, and WEI's mission and resources. Janie, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
We're going to do our audio descriptions of ourselves right now. So I am a white woman with long brown hair. I have a light orange colored shirt on today and some sparkly earrings, I guess. And I am in my early 50s. And Janie, would you like to provide us with a self-description as well?
Sure. I am a white and Hispanic woman. I am today I'm wearing a magenta colored top with a black undershirt. I have on glasses. And my hair is up in a bun. I'm seated in my power wheelchair in my guest bedroom that doubles as my home office. And I use she, her pronouns.
Thank you so much. And I also use she, her pronouns. And so let's start off by talking a little bit about you, a little bit more about you and the work that you do. Talk to us about how you got started, and anything else about yourself you'd like to let us know.
So I am a woman with a disability. I was born with a disability and I'm a lifelong wheelchair user. So naturally, I've been really interested in disability rights my whole life. But I've also been interested in the intersection of gender and disability, being a woman with a disability and having lived experience in that regard, and just intersectionality generally, about how when disability comes into play with other marginalized identities, how that shapes our lived experience. And I've always been really interested in that aspect of disability rights, looking at the intersectionality of it. And so when I found WEI, after I graduated from graduate school with my PhD in disability studies, it was really like a match made in heaven, because it took my areas of interest and meld them into an organization. And I was so honored to have gotten a position there and have worked there for about 3 years now.
That's fantastic. And I know you gave a little bit of the description of what intersectionality is. And I have also found that I feel like we're talking about intersectionality all the time within organizations who are either advocacy organizations or are doing the work. And some people are still unfamiliar. Can we talk about like a very basic definition of what intersectionality is and how it applies to the work that we're doing? I know you gave a little bit of that description, but I think that some of the general audience is still like, but what does that mean?
Absolutely. So intersectionality really looks at how people's identities intersect with one another and shape their experiences. So when we're talking about marginalized identities, such as disability identity, gender identity, identity associated with race, etc., sometimes those identities are marginalized, and people are oppressed because of them. They have stigma attached to them. And so when a person is multi-marginalized because of their identities, you see intersectionality coming into play, and how that plays out and shapes a person's experience based on the multiple identities in which they hold. Um, and each part of our identity is very important to who we are. And oftentimes, within the disability rights movement in particular, and some of the other movements, we're often, asked to give up an important part of our identity and just focus on that one portion of the identity that the movement focuses on. For instance, disability rights in the early days was really focused on just disability rights and didn't take into account, other identities that weren't very important to a person, such as race, gender, etc. And so it's really important when we talk about people to recognize all of their identities.
Thank you so much. That was a really great breakdown. I find myself looking back. I spoke to a group of students last week, and I used some of the terms that I feel like we often use, and realized that there was a lot that still was not being fully understood. So I thought, let's take a minute and get to the basics of it. So thank you so much for that. And how great, how great for you to get this dream job. I feel that way about working at DRNY. It's something I don't know that as many people experience when they find that position that is encompassing all the things that they want to do and are passionate about. Talk to us a little bit about Women Enabled International. And so you've been there for about 3 years. So talk to us about the organization itself and how old it is, and what the mission is.
Absolutely. So Women Enabled International is a nonprofit organization that advocates for the rights of people living at the intersection of gender and disability worldwide. It was founded in 2012 by Stephanie Ortoliva, who is a human rights lawyer. And she founded the organization because she saw a gap between the disability movement and the gender movement that didn't need to be there. The gender movement wasn't talking about disability, wasn't talking about disabled people in relationship to gender issues, and vice versa. The disability movement really wasn't including gender in their discussion. And so Stephanie founded the organization to kind of bridge that gap.
That's fantastic. And I feel like there's so much there, right? When we talk about intersectionality, as we did in the beginning, and the compounding effects of how more than one intersection of a marginalized group, really, it compounds so many things, right? When it comes to oppression, as well as what issues need to be addressed. And so when we're thinking about the barriers that are really affecting women who have disabilities, or and would it be fair to say also that someone who identifies as a female, as we're moving into the conversation about gender as well as disability, let's talk about some of those barriers and how it is that WEI is really advocating and working towards changing that, at least here in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. So WEI not only advocates for the rights of women, but also gender diverse people as well. And we have several resources and advocacy platforms that we use to do our advocacy. Among them are UN level advocacy. So we do a lot of advocacy based at the UN level, the United Nations, and making sure that disability and gender issues are included in the UN documents and country reviews, because the UN reviews countries' compliance when they ratify a treaty, and when they're members of a treaty, they review country compliance periodically. So we make sure that people living at the intersection of gender and disability are thought about in those reviews and are included in the recommendations that they give the state. In addition to UN-based advocacy, we also have several movement building initiatives, one of which is the US Alliance, the US Gender and Disability Justice Alliance, which I am very proud to have to coordinate. And what that is a collective of people living at the intersection of gender and disability in the United States. And we work together to advocate for issues that are important to our lives. We've identified 4 core issues that we work on collectively, and that is sexual and access to sexual and reproductive health and rights, access to employment, access to home and community-based services, and then lastly, educating organizations that work at our intersection, but not specifically on disability, such as gender justice organizations and race justice organizations, about how disability is connected to their work. And so those are the 4 issues that we work on as an alliance. And if you want to learn more about that, you can head over to womenenabled.org, click on how we work, and then click on US Alliance. And you can learn about our advocacy work and also fill out an interest form.
And we will put that info in our notes too. I feel like there's so much information we want to get out about your organization. So don't worry, audience, we are going to put all of this information in the notes so you will easily be able to find it. Go ahead.
Awesome. And we also do a lot of capacity strengthening initiatives, both with advocates with disabilities as well as organizations working at our intersection, gender justice organizations, etc. And capacity strengthening initiatives with regards to funders as well, making sure that they know the importance of funding initiatives at our intersection.
And so when you and I first met and had a conversation not too long ago, there was a point where I thought we could probably have 12 different episodes just with you alone. And as you're talking, I'm writing down, I don't want to ask about this now too. I want to ask about this now too. And one of the things that I want to ask you about, and certainly you can respond when you're finished with the first answer, which of course, I feel like all the questions, they have so much information. I don't want to stop with the information you want to give. But as you're talking, we're talking about gender justice, and I think it's also one of those things that's important to talk about the difference between gender rights and gender justice, or disability rights and disability justice, and that there is a difference in the work. So when and if you're ready to jump to that is just something that I feel is so important when we talk about these issues. But I also don't want to get you away from the 4 core issues of the Alliance, because the Alliance is doing such great work.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, the distinction between rights and justice, especially in terms of in the disability movement, is a very important one to understand, and one that often gets misconstrued a lot. So disability justice is really focused on making sure that multi-marginalized people with disabilities are at the forefront of the movement and are leading the movement, so that from the beginning, and that projects are created by them and led by multi-marginalized people with disabilities from the beginning. And that is a very important distinction between disability rights, because disability rights was founded by primarily white men who were in a position of power, and they were primarily wheelchair users, and the movement was not intersectional, and really didn't capture the voices of multi-marginalized people with disabilities. And like I said earlier, the movement often asked people to give up important parts of their identity to be in the disability rights movement. It didn't allow people to embrace their full selves and all aspects of their identity. And disability justice embraces all aspects of a person's identity and makes sure that the voices of multi-marginalized people are centered throughout the movement from the beginning. And again, not just included, but leading the movement very intentionally.
Thank you so much for that. It's such a great explanation, and it's something I think that really feeds into part of the work that that the Alliance is working on. One of their one of the first ones that you mentioned, which is, you know, the sexual health and health rights of people with disabilities. And we talked a little bit about the Dobbs decision, the overturning of Roe, and as well as Section 504 access, and how these two issues have common threads. And again, there are issues that don't necessarily seem to have a connection. And then when you look at them through the lens of intersectionality, you see that they do in fact have a lot of common issues that need to be discussed, and are also having similar barriers. So, and of course, those two are just huge topics. But talk a little bit about the work and advocacy that the Alliance is doing with WEI, especially in relation to those two things, as this is something that I feel like our entire audience knows about the overturning of of Roe. So it's very much present in our media wherever you're looking. So talk a little bit about that, and really why this is crucial work, especially now.
Yes. So the overturning of Roe is a major barrier for many people with disabilities. And, you know, that's for a number of reasons. Unfortunately, the states with the highest number of people with disabilities are many of whom are multi-marginalized, are also the states with the highest abortion restrictions. And that is very problematic because people are being forced to travel out of state, and out of state travel is often not accessible to people with disabilities. And you know, they often have to rely on caregivers or family members to assist with out of state travel. And you know, that can be a real problem when it comes to right to privacy, especially for people who might, be in an abusive relationship or might have to rely on a partner who has been abusive, for help in getting an abortion if needed. And so, it could be in that situation or risk somebody's life. Um, Also, uh, people with disabilities are at greater risk than people without disabilities of developing a pregnancy related complication that, um, necessitates an abortion. And lots of states have exceptions, to that, uh, rule, but, um, a lot of doctors do not understand the exceptions. They're afraid of prosecution, if they perform an abortion. So, um, people with disabilities' lives are being put at risk because the abortions are being delayed, even though they are necessary for, life-saving measures. Um, and lastly, the, websites, many state websites that provide crucial information on abortion care, how to access abortion care in light of Roe, in light of the overturning of Roe, uh, are not accessible. Are not accessible in terms of being in plain language for people who might need that, are not accessible in terms of, for people who are navigating with screen readers, etc. And so getting the information in an accessible format has also been a barrier. Um, and I will say though, on a positive note, I will shift to section 504 and the new rule that is being proposed to section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, because it is great, great news. So section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability, from federally funded programs. Um, and um, the proposed rule updates the law that has not been updated in many, many years and really needs to be updated. And one of the most exciting additions is that it will make mandatory that federally funded healthcare facilities provide accessible medical and diagnostic equipment. So this includes weight scales, exam tables, exam chairs, and, um, radiological equipment, etc. And this will make it possible for, um, people to receive life-saving tests and screenings such as mammograms and, pap smears that have been very difficult to obtain when the provider does not have the medical, adaptive medical equipment, available. Under the ADA currently, they have to provide reasonable accommodations. So that would mean helping someone transfer onto an inaccessible table, etc. But oftentimes people are reluctant to request that because of safety concerns, etc. And so they go without the testing. Um, and that can be really detrimental to their health, especially because women with disabilities are at greater risks of developing breast and cervical cancer than women without disabilities.
Thank you so much for that really great transition from one to the other. It was a great way to move from the unfortunate to the really good news that we're hearing today. So thank you so much for that. And we did talk about this a little bit before, when it comes to feminist movements, right? There's discrimination, and sometimes I feel like we hear or we even see feedback within groups that, where there isn't necessarily a consensus on where the focus should be, right? And I feel like that has happened all too often in feminist movements. And talk a little bit about that and how Women Enabled is really addressing the discrimination and stigma within feminist movements, and how it is that these types of stigmas really interfere with the work on a whole. And I think that's something that we miss a lot when it comes to stigmas within every movement, but specifically within the feminist movement.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the biggest issues is that within the feminist movement, women with disabilities have historically been overlooked. They a lot of the mainstream feminist movement operate under the assumption of, the person having a quote unquote normal functioning body and mind, and that is just not the case always. So um really working with educating feminist movements um about disability, about the prevalence of disability, um that somebody can become disabled at any time. It's the only minority category where people can join at any time. And and um that it is important within the movements, within the feminist movement and all movements, to have uh, the events, your advocacy, inclusive of um, people with disabilities. And that includes, having closed captioning at your events, um, including people with disabilities in your advocacy agendas, on your advisory boards, and in your leadership. And don't silo our issues to disability specific organizations when disability is a cross-cutting issue and should be brought up into every sector of advocacy, regardless of if, it's a solely disability rights organization. It should be cross-cutting throughout organizations at all levels, and organizations need to make um, provisions to make sure that feminists with disabilities are included in advocacy at all levels. And WEI has really done a lot of work in that regard to make sure that's happening. um in particular, the Inclusive Generation Equality Collective focuses specifically on that, to make sure the feminist movement is accessible to people with disabilities and that we are included. And this collective was formed to ensure that Generation Equality Forum, which was convened by UN Women, to accelerate um, gender equality. And the collective was formed to ensure that this forum was accessible to feminists with disabilities. And it was held, I believe, in 2021 in Paris and in Mexico. And it was held virtually. And unfortunately, the platforms were not accessible at all. They were difficult to navigate. They weren't accessible to screen readers. There was no closed captioning during the events. And so it made it very difficult for feminists with disabilities to participate. And as a follow-up to those barriers, the Inclusive Generation Equality came up with the Feminist Accessibility Protocol, which is a series of 13 commitments that feminist organizations can sign on to and make to ensure that their advocacy platforms include people with disabilities, because that was one of the barriers at the forum, that the advocacy platforms didn't include people with disabilities, and two, that their meetings and events were accessible to people with disabilities and included things like closed captioning and sign language interpreting and language interpreting, etc. Um, so in the protocol, was formed by a series of focus groups, which included, I think, approximately 109 advocates. So a lot of thought went into the protocol, and was really driven by advocates with disabilities themselves. And that protocol is available on our website for anyone that wants to take a look at it.
I'm so glad that you brought up this protocol. I was just going to ask you about your resource center. The sheer volume of information that WEI has on their site it's unbelievable. And the spectrum of information is anything. I feel like anything I had a question about, there was a piece of information on it for me to take a look at, especially the toolkits and the digital action packs, to really give people an idea of, if you want to get involved, if you want to do something, if you want to see how you can make a difference, it's all there for you. It is a playbook, it's a strategy, it's a roadmap, it's everything and more. So I know we just talked about the protocol, but talk a little bit about some of the other items that you have there. They're phenomenal. And I would love for our audience to hear a little bit more about them. And I am urging everyone in our audience to go to the website and take a look, because there isn't anything you can't find information about on the site. So talk a little bit about some of the other resources you have.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a plethora of resources on our website, so please use them. Reach out if you have any questions. Some of the other resources that I think are really important for people to know about is the accountability toolkit, which teaches people how to use the Inter-American Commission if they perceive a human rights violation going on in their country who is a party to the Inter-American system. And so the Inter-American system is a human rights system that operates similarly to the UN, the United Nations. They have but it only includes countries within the Americas, and they have a series of treaties, or otherwise known as conventions, that states sign on to and ratify. And they're on a variety of different issues. So there's one on the rights of people with disabilities. There's one on preventing violence against women. There's one on eliminating racial discrimination, etc. And if you feel like your country is in violation of a treaty and they have signed on to it, and you can check the list of countries that have signed on to different treaties in the toolkit. The toolkit will take you through a step-by-step process on how to file a petition or a complaint with the commission. And once the complaint is submitted, the commission will review it and may hold a hearing or issue recommendations to the state party on how to remedy the violation. So it's a great toolkit. It's very in-depth. It's quite lengthy, but it's easy to navigate and read through. And I encourage everyone to go check that out. Another publication that we recently did that I was a part of is a resource guide for gender inclusion and disability rights spaces. So it's almost always, talked about the other way around, uh, disability inclusion in gender spaces. But this specifically targets gender inclusion and disability rights spaces. And it talks about the barriers and facilitators that women and gender diverse people with disabilities identified during focus group research that we conducted in 2022. And it also goes through a set of targeted recommendations for increasing gender inclusion and disability rights spaces. And so if you are work at or in a disability rights organization, or leading an organization, please go and check that out, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions in that regard.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And really, I do urge everyone to go and take a look at all of the resources that are available here. And Janie, this has been such a great conversation. And again, I feel like we could have several more. But before we sign off today, is there anything else that you want to talk to our audience about? Anything that's new and upcoming that you'd like to let us know about?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I want to share with everyone an exciting project that the U.S. Gender and Disability Justice Alliance is undertaking. It is a storytelling initiative which is aimed at collecting stories about accessing sexual and reproductive health care for people with disabilities. And we are hoping to collect, a wide range of stories from people from a variety of different backgrounds. We're hoping to collect stories regarding, trying to access routine, uh, sexual and reproductive health care, as well as pregnancy related care, abortion care, gender affirming care. And again, we hope to get, a wide range of people from different backgrounds and have different perspectives represented in the project. And people can share their story in whatever way they see fit, whatever feels right to them. Some ideas of how stories could be shared include writing a narrative, participating in an interview with Alliance members, a drawing or picture, writing a musical piece, however a person would like to share their story is what we're looking for. We want you to be able to share your story in whatever way makes you the most comfortable. So if people are interested in participating in that, they can reach out to me directly at j.mejias, MEJIAS at womenenabled.org. And we can also put that in the show notes, correct?
Yes, we absolutely will.
Okay, great. Thank you.
This is such an exciting project. I cannot wait to see what becomes of it. And certainly if anyone needs information, they come back to DRNY, we can also give that information back out for you as well. What an extraordinary way to have people really tell their story in the way that they want to. It's really so exciting.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention that the stories we collect will be displayed on a dedicated web page for the project, as well as um, in a highlight booklet that we'll create from the project and distribute it to community members as well as policymakers. And people are welcome to share their story and attach their name to it, or share their story anonymously as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Janie, this has been a great conversation. I look forward to talking with you again. All of what we talked about, all the links, the ways to connect with you will be in our show notes. And I really look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Empire State of Rights has been brought to you by Disability Rights New York, your source for disability rights and advocacy. If you enjoyed our program, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this post.
This episode was made possible thanks to a generous grant from the New York Bar Foundation.
The video for this episode is available on our YouTube channel with closed captioning and ASL interpretation. If there is a subject you would like us to discuss, please email podcast@drny.org or comment below. For more Empire State of Rights, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.